3 weeks before my wedding day, I thought I had everything figured out. After 4 years of no contact with my toxic parents, I finally felt safe and loved with my fiancé Jake, who understood why I had to cut them out of my life. We were planning our dream wedding, and I believed I was marrying someone who truly respected my boundaries and protected my peace. But what I discovered 3 days before walking down the aisle would shatter everything I thought I knew about the man I was about to marry. Before I tell you how my perfect wedding turned into my worst nightmare, let me know where you are watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. Trust me, you will want to hear how this betrayal unfolded and how I found the courage to choose myself. Now let me take you back to where it all started to unravel. Growing up with Richard and Patricia as parents was like walking on eggshells every single day of my childhood. They were the kind of people who disguised their control as love and their manipulation as concern. From the time I could form my own opinions, they made sure I knew that my thoughts and feelings were wrong, that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too ungrateful for everything they had given me. The constant criticism started early. When I was 8 years old and wanted to join the school soccer team, my mother told me I was not athletic enough and would just embarrass myself. When I brought home a report card with all A's and 1 B+, my father focused only on that B+, asking me why I could not be more like my cousin, who got perfect grades. Every achievement was minimized, every mistake was magnified, and every boundary I tried to set was seen as rebellion that needed to be crushed. As I got older, their control became more suffocating. They monitored my friendships, deciding which kids were good influences and which ones I needed to stop seeing. They read my diary, went through my phone, and made me account for every minute I spent away from home. When I was accepted to a college 3 states away with a partial scholarship, they forbade me from going, claiming it was too far and too expensive, even though I had worked 2 jobs to save money for the remaining costs. Instead, I attended the local community college while living at home, watching my dreams of independence slip away. They sabotaged my first serious relationship when I was 22, telling my boyfriend lies about me and creating so much drama that he eventually walked away. They did the same thing with the next 2 relationships, always finding ways to insert themselves and create chaos until the guys could not handle it anymore. The final straw came when I was 26 and had finally saved enough money to move out. I had been working at a marketing firm and was offered a promotion that would require relocating to another city. It was exactly the opportunity I had been waiting for, a chance to build my career and finally gain some distance from their constant interference. When I told them about the offer, they completely lost their minds. My mother cried and screamed that I was abandoning them, that I was selfish and ungrateful after everything they had sacrificed for me. My father threatened to disown me and cut me out of their will if I took the job. They called my boss and tried to convince him that I was unreliable and would not be a good fit for the promotion. When that did not work, they showed up at my apartment and refused to leave until I agreed to turn down the offer. That night, sitting in my kitchen with my parents yelling at me and demanding I choose them over my own future, something inside me finally broke. I realized that this would never end, that they would never respect me as an adult, and that they would continue to sabotage every good thing in my life as long as I allowed them access to it. The next morning, I called my boss and accepted the promotion. 2 weeks later, I moved across the country and blocked my parents on every platform I could think of. The first year of no contact was incredibly difficult. They tried everything to reach me, from having relatives call me to showing up at my new workplace. I had to change my phone number twice and eventually had to threaten legal action to get them to stop. But gradually, with the help of therapy and a supportive group of new friends, I began to heal from years of emotional abuse and manipulation. I met Jake 2 years ago at a coffee shop near my apartment. Our mutual friend Sarah had invited both of us to her birthday party, but we ended up talking in the corner for 3 hours, completely ignoring the celebration happening around us. Jake was different from anyone I had ever dated. He was calm where my parents had been chaotic, supportive where they had been critical, and respectful where they had been controlling. When I eventually told him about my decision to cut contact with my parents, he did not try to fix it or suggest that I was overreacting. He simply listened, held my hand, and told me that he was sorry I had to go through that. He never once suggested that I should try to reconcile or that family was everything. He understood that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. Our relationship felt like the healthy, stable partnership I had always dreamed of. Jake encouraged my career ambitions, celebrated my successes without trying to diminish them, and gave me the space I needed to continue healing. When he proposed 6 months ago at the park, where we had our first official date, I finally felt like I had found my person, someone who would always have my back and protect the peace I had worked so hard to create. Planning our wedding had been such a joy. We kept it relatively small, inviting only the people who truly mattered to us. My chosen family of friends, Jake's loving parents and siblings, and a few close colleagues. For the first time in my life, I was planning a major life event without the stress of managing toxic family dynamics or worrying about someone creating drama. I felt free and excited about starting this new chapter. But about 3 weeks before the wedding, I started noticing small changes in Jake's behavior. He became increasingly secretive about phone calls, often stepping outside or into another room when his phone rang. When I asked about it, he would shrug and say it was work or wedding vendor stuff. At first, I did not think much of it. Wedding planning can be stressful, and maybe he was just trying to handle some of the pressure. However, the secretive behavior continued and even escalated. I caught glimpses of unfamiliar numbers on his phone screen numbers with area codes I did not recognize. When I casually asked about them, Jake would quickly put his phone away and change the subject. He started handling more of the wedding vendor meetings alone, telling me he wanted to surprise me with some special touches and that I should focus on the fun parts like choosing flowers and finalizing my dress. What made me even more suspicious was when my friend Sarah mentioned that Jake had been asking her strange questions about my childhood and hometown. She said he seemed particularly interested in details about my family traditions and what my parents were like when we were growing up. When I asked Jake about these conversations, he claimed he was just trying to understand my background better so he could incorporate some meaningful elements into our wedding ceremony. The explanation felt reasonable enough, but something in my gut told me there was more to it. Jake also seemed to be handling all the guest confirmations alone, which struck me as odd since we had originally planned to manage the guest list together. When I tried to look at the final numbers, he would redirect my attention to other wedding details, insisting that everything was under control and I should not worry about the logistics. I started having trouble sleeping, tossing and turning as my anxiety grew. During the day, I found myself analyzing every conversation, looking for clues about what Jake might be hiding. Part of me felt guilty for not trusting him, especially when he had been nothing but supportive throughout our entire relationship. But the other part of me, the part that had learned to recognize manipulation and deception from years of living with my parents, was sending up red flags that I could not ignore. The first concrete sign that something was really wrong came when I decided to double-check some of the wedding details myself. I had been feeling increasingly excluded from decisions about my own wedding, and I wanted to make sure everything was actually as perfect as Jake kept insisting it was. I called the venue coordinator Margaret under the pretense of confirming some last-minute details. During our conversation, Margaret casually mentioned the 2 additional guests that Jake had added to our list the previous week. My blood ran cold as I processed what she had said. Additional guests. We had finalized our guest list over a month ago, and Jake had not mentioned adding anyone new. When I pressed Margaret for details, she seemed confused by my lack of knowledge about the change. Margaret explained that Jake had called her personally to add 2 special family members to the guest list and had requested that they be seated at a table near the front. She assumed I knew about the addition since it involved my family. The way she said the words made my stomach drop. My family. The only family members Jake could possibly add would be my parents, the people I had specifically and clearly stated would never be welcome at any event in my life. That evening, when Jake came home from what he claimed was a work dinner, I confronted him about the additional guests. My hands were shaking as I asked him directly who he had added to our wedding list without telling me. Jake's face immediately changed, and I could see him scrambling for an explanation. He told me that the extra guests were his college friends Mark and Lisa, who had confirmed at the last minute that they could attend after all. The explanation sounded rehearsed and hollow. Jake and I had discussed his college friends extensively during our wedding planning, and he had never mentioned Mark and Lisa before. More importantly, if they were his friends, why would Margaret have referred to them as my family members? I pressed Jake for more details about these mysterious friends, but he became defensive and accused me of being paranoid about the wedding planning. Over the next few days, I found myself consumed with the need to uncover the truth. The rational part of my brain kept trying to convince me that I was overreacting, that Jake would never deliberately hurt me by inviting my parents to our wedding. But the part of me that had survived years of gaslighting and manipulation knew that something was seriously wrong. When Jake left for work the next morning, I made the decision to investigate further. I felt terrible about violating his privacy, but I could not shake the feeling that he was hiding something major from me. I searched through his laptop, looking for any emails or documents that might give me a clue about the mysterious additional guests. Most of his email folders contained work-related correspondence or normal wedding planning messages. However, when I checked his phone records online, I discovered something that made my heart race. There were multiple calls over the past 6 weeks to a number with an area code I recognized immediately. It was the area code for my hometown, the place where my parents still lived. I ran the number through a reverse lookup service, and my worst fears were confirmed. The number belonged to a landline registered to Richard and Patricia Thompson, my parents. I spent the rest of that day in a state of panic, trying to figure out what this meant and what I should do with the information. Had my parents somehow found Jake's contact information and been harassing him? Was he taking their calls to protect me from their attempts to reach me? Or worse, had he been having ongoing conversations with them about our wedding? The thought made me physically sick. I called my best friend Emma and told her what I had discovered. Emma had been my closest supporter during the difficult process of cutting contact with my parents, and she knew better than anyone how damaging their presence in my life had been. When I told her about the phone calls and the mysterious additional guests, she was horrified and urged me to confront Jake immediately. But I was not ready for that confrontation yet. I needed more information first. That night, I barely slept, staring at the ceiling and imagining worst-case scenarios. What if Jake had been manipulated by my parents into thinking that I was the problem? What if they had convinced him that they were loving parents who just wanted to reconcile with their stubborn daughter? What if he had bought into their lies and decided to stage some kind of surprise reunion at our wedding? The next day was my final dress, fitting something I had been looking forward to for weeks. But as I stood in front of the mirror in my wedding gown, I could not feel any joy or excitement. The dress was beautiful, and it fit perfectly, but all I could think about was the possibility that my parents might be in the audience when I walked down the aisle. The bridal shop owner noticed my distress and asked if I was feeling all right, commenting that I did not look like a happy bride should look just days before her wedding. I broke down crying right there in the fitting room, still wearing my wedding dress. The shop owner was incredibly kind, bringing me tissues and asking if there was anything she could do to help. I could not explain the situation without sounding completely crazy, so I just told her I was dealing with some family stress and would be fine. But I was not fine. I was falling apart, and I still did not have definitive proof of what Jake was hiding. That evening, Jake came home later than usual, claiming he had been dealing with a work emergency. I noticed that he seemed nervous and kept checking his phone throughout dinner. When I tried to engage him in conversation about our wedding day timeline, he gave vague, distracted answers. Finally, I could not stand it anymore. I asked him directly to show me the final guest list so I could review the seating arrangements one more time. Jake's response confirmed all of my fears. Instead of simply showing me the list or offering to go over it together, he became defensive and told me that I was stressing too much about details that did not matter. He insisted that everything was handled and that I should trust him to manage the final preparations. The more he deflected my simple request, the more certain I became that he was hiding something terrible from me. I made the decision that I would uncover the truth the next morning one way or another. I could not marry someone who was keeping secrets about something as important as our wedding guest list, especially when those secrets might involve the people who had spent decades trying to destroy my mental health and self-worth. That night was the longest night of my life, as I lay awake next to Jake, wondering if the man I had planned to spend my life with had betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. The morning before our wedding day, Jake left early for what he said was a groomsmen breakfast with his brother and best man. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and called the venue directly. I told Margaret that there was a potential family emergency and I needed to know exactly who was on our guest list so I could contact them if necessary. Margaret was helpful and understanding, and she began reading through the names on our confirmed guest list. Everything sounded normal until she reached the end of the list, where the most recent additions were recorded. When she said the names Richard Thompson and Patricia Thompson, my entire world collapsed around me. I dropped the phone and immediately started having a panic attack, my chest tightening and my vision blurring as the reality of Jake's betrayal hit me full force. After I managed to compose myself enough to finish the call with Margaret, I immediately contacted Emma. I could barely form coherent sentences through my sobs as I told her that Jake had invited my parents to our wedding without telling me. Emma was horrified and said she was coming over right away. I was still wearing my wedding dress from trying it on one final time when she arrived, and the sight of me crying in my bridal gown while pacing around our apartment was almost too much for both of us to handle. Emma helped me search through Jake's belongings for more evidence of his deception. In his desk drawer, we found printed copies of email exchanges between Jake and my mother that made me sick to my stomach. The emails went back almost 2 months, starting with my mother reaching out to Jake through social media with a heartfelt message about how much she and my father regretted the misunderstanding that had led to our estrangement. Reading those emails was like watching my mother's manipulation tactics in real time. She had crafted the perfect sob story painting herself and my father as heartbroken parents who just wanted to make things right with their daughter. She told Jake that I had always been dramatic and prone to overreacting, and that the family issues were really just a series of miscommunications that had been blown out of proportion. Even more devastating were Jake's responses to her messages. He had completely bought into her version of events and had agreed that families should stick together no matter what. In one email, he actually wrote that he was sure I would thank him later for helping to heal the rift between me and my parents. He had taken it upon himself to fix what he saw as a problem in my life without ever considering that I might have very good reasons for my choices. The last email in the chain was from my mother, sent just 3 days earlier, confirming their flight information and thanking Jake for making it possible for them to be at their daughter's wedding. She had signed it with love and gratitude, as if Jake was some kind of hero for going behind my back and violating the most important boundary I had ever set. When Jake returned from his supposed groomsmen breakfast and found me sitting at our kitchen table with the emails spread out in front of me, still wearing my wedding dress, but with my makeup ruined from crying, he knew immediately that his secret was out. His face went white, and he started stammering about how he could explain everything and how I needed to hear him out before I reacted. I was beyond reaction at that point. I was in a state of shock and disbelief that the person I had trusted more than anyone else in the world had chosen to believe my abusive parents over me. When I asked him how he could possibly justify going behind my back and inviting the people who had damaged me so deeply, he actually had the nerve to tell me that they were my parents and that they loved me and that people can change. Jake's defense of his actions showed me that he fundamentally did not understand or believe the extent of the abuse I had suffered. He thought he was playing peacemaker in some minor family disagreement, not endangering my mental health and safety by giving my manipulative parents access to the most important day of my life. When I tried to explain that his actions were a massive violation of my trust and boundaries, he accused me of being too stubborn to see that he was trying to help. The conversation escalated quickly with Jake insisting that he had done nothing wrong and that I was overreacting as usual. The phrase "as usual" hit me like a slap in the face. It was exactly the kind of dismissive language my parents had always used to invalidate my feelings and experiences. In that moment, I realized that Jake had been talking to my parents for months, absorbing their toxic narrative about who I was and why I was the problem in the family dynamic. When I demanded that he call my parents immediately and uninvite them from our wedding, Jake refused. He told me that they were already in town, having flown in that morning, and that it would be cruel and embarrassing to turn them away now. The fact that my parents were in the same city, probably just a few miles from where I was sitting, made me feel physically ill. Jake had not only violated my boundaries, but he had created a situation where I was no longer safe in my own hometown. I asked Jake if he understood that his actions had forced me to choose between having a wedding with my abusers present or not having a wedding at all. He seemed genuinely shocked that I would even consider canceling our wedding over what he called a family reunion. He kept insisting that we could work through this, that I just needed to be open-minded and give my parents a chance to make things right. But there was nothing to work through. Jake had proven that he did not respect me, did not believe me, and did not understand the first thing about healthy relationships or boundaries. He had allied himself with the people who had spent years trying to control and manipulate me, and he expected me to be grateful for his interference. I realized that I could not marry someone who would make such fundamental decisions about my life without my input or consent. I took off my engagement ring and set it on the kitchen table next to the printed emails. Jake's shock was genuine, as I told him that there would be no wedding, that I could not and would not marry someone who had betrayed my trust so completely. He seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what he had done, but it was far too late for apologies or promises to do better. Walking into our bedroom to change out of my wedding dress was one of the hardest things I had ever done. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely manage the buttons and zippers, and I kept having to stop to catch my breath as waves of grief and anger washed over me. This was supposed to be my wedding day, the day I married the person I thought was my soulmate, and instead, I was preparing to flee from another situation where someone I loved had chosen to prioritize my abusers over my well-being. The phone calls I had to make that afternoon were among the most difficult conversations of my life. I started with the venue coordinator, Margaret, who was incredibly understanding when I explained that the wedding was being canceled due to circumstances beyond my control. She did not ask for details, but she did tell me that calling off a wedding is always better than going through with one when you know it is wrong. Her kindness in that moment meant more to me than she will ever know. Next, I had to call our wedding party and immediate family members to let them know that the ceremony was not happening. Emma helped me by contacting the other bridesmaids and asking them to spread the word to the rest of our friend group. Jake's family was shocked and confused, especially since they had already arrived in town for the wedding. His mother called me directly, begging me to reconsider and asking if there was anything she could do to fix the situation. I explained to Jake's mother that her son had violated my trust by secretly inviting my abusive parents to our wedding, and that this was not the kind of problem that could be solved with a conversation or compromise. She was horrified when she understood what Jake had done, and she apologized profusely for his behavior. She told me that she had raised him better than that, and that she could not understand how he had thought his actions were acceptable. The hardest part was listening to Jake try to manage the situation with my parents. I could hear him on the phone in the next room trying to explain that the wedding was postponed due to cold feet and last-minute jitters. When my mother demanded to speak with me directly, Jake told her that I was too upset to talk and that maybe they should go back to their hotel for now. I heard him promise them that he would work things out and that we would reschedule soon. I made it clear to Jake that there would be no rescheduling, no working things out, and absolutely no contact between me and my parents. I told him that I would not speak to them, see them, or acknowledge their presence in any way, and that if he had any respect for me at all, he would make sure they understood that their trip had been wasted. The fact that he still seemed to think this was a temporary setback, rather than a permanent ending, showed me how little he truly understood about the situation. That evening, I packed my essential belongings and went to stay with Emma while Jake processed the reality of what his actions had cost him. Emma's guest room became my sanctuary as I tried to wrap my mind around the fact that in one day I had lost my fiancé, my wedding, and my sense of safety and trust. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it was a growing sense of relief that I had discovered Jake's true character before I legally bound myself to him. The weeks that followed were a blur of practical arrangements and emotional processing. I had to find a new apartment since staying in the place Jake and I had shared was no longer an option. I increased my therapy sessions to twice a week, focusing on the betrayal trauma and the intersection between my childhood abuse and this new violation of trust. My therapist helped me understand that Jake's behavior was a form of emotional abuse in itself, disguised as trying to help. Moving out was harder than I had expected, not because I missed Jake, but because I had to face the reality that I had been completely wrong about who he was. Going through our shared belongings, I found more evidence of his deception, including a notebook where he had written down talking points for conversations with my parents and strategies for convincing me to reconcile with them. Jake's attempts to contact me continued for several weeks after I moved out. He sent long emails explaining his reasoning, left voicemails asking me to meet him for coffee so we could talk through the misunderstanding, and even showed up at my workplace once to try to convince me that we could work past this. Each contact attempt showed me that he still did not understand the severity of what he had done or why it was unforgivable. After 2 weeks of harassment, I had to block Jake's number and email address. I also had to block several of my relatives who had been contacted by my parents and were trying to mediate on their behalf. The flying monkeys came out in full force, with distant family members calling me stubborn and unforgiving for not giving my parents a chance to make amends at my wedding. My parents also attempted to reach me through various channels, sending flowers to my workplace with cards about how much they loved and missed me, and trying to friend me on social media with fake accounts. Each attempt at contact reinforced my decision to maintain no contact and showed me that they still did not understand or accept responsibility for their abusive behavior. Through all of this chaos, I was supported by an incredible network of friends who had witnessed my journey of healing from my family trauma and who understood exactly why Jake's actions were so damaging. They rallied around me, helping me move, bringing me meals during the worst days, and reminding me that I had made the right choice, even when I was second-guessing myself. The most important realization I came to during those dark weeks was that I had actually dodged a massive bullet by discovering the truth before the wedding. If Jake had managed to keep his deception hidden until after we were married, I would have been trapped in a legal and financial partnership with someone who fundamentally did not respect my autonomy or believe my experiences. The pain of calling off my wedding was nothing compared to the pain of divorce after years of being undermined and gaslit by my own husband. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life around the truth of who I was and what I needed in relationships. I started dating again after about 6 months, but with a much clearer understanding of what healthy boundaries looked like and what red flags I needed to watch for. I learned to trust my instincts more completely and to never again ignore the warning signs when someone tried to minimize my experiences or override my decisions. I met Marcus about 8 months after my canceled wedding, and his response to my story was everything Jake's should have been. When I told Marcus about my no-contact relationship with my parents and the reasons behind it, he listened without judgment and told me that he admired my strength in protecting myself from people who had hurt me. He has never once suggested that I should try to reconcile or that family relationships are worth preserving at any cost. Marcus understands that healthy partners protect each other's boundaries rather than violating them. He has met several of my chosen family members and understands that the people who love and support me are my real family, regardless of biological relationships. When we talk about future plans, he always checks with me about my comfort level and makes sure that any decisions we make together are truly mutual. Looking back now, I am grateful that I trusted my instincts when something felt wrong, even though it meant destroying the life I thought I wanted. I learned that it is better to be alone than to be with someone who does not respect your fundamental needs for safety and autonomy. I also learned that betrayal can come from unexpected sources, and that the people we think we know best are sometimes capable of actions that shock us to our core. The experience taught me that healing from abuse is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of learning to recognize and respond to unhealthy dynamics wherever they appear. Jake's willingness to ally himself with my abusers showed me that even people who seem supportive can harbor beliefs and attitudes that make them unsafe partners for trauma survivors. Most importantly, I learned that I have the strength to choose myself over social expectations and other people's comfort. Calling off my wedding was embarrassing and painful, but it was also an act of self-preservation and self-respect that I am proud of. I refused to sacrifice my mental health and safety for the sake of avoiding conflict or disappointing people who did not understand my situation. Today, I am living a life that feels authentic and peaceful in ways I never thought possible. I have maintained my no-contact relationship with my parents, and I have not once regretted that decision. My relationship with Marcus continues to grow stronger because it is built on genuine mutual respect and understanding. I have a career I love, friendships that nourish me, and a sense of confidence in my own judgment that no one can shake. If you are dealing with a similar situation, whether it involves toxic family members or a partner who does not respect your boundaries, I want you to know that you have the right to protect yourself even when other people do not understand your choices. Trust your instincts, seek support from people who truly understand your experiences, and never let anyone convince you that you owe loyalty to people who have harmed you. The path of healing and self-protection is not always easy, but it is always worth it. You deserve relationships that honor your truth, respect your boundaries, and support your well-being. Do not settle for anything less, no matter how much pressure you face from others, to forgive, forget, or reconcile with people who have not earned access to your life. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between your own well-being and someone else's expectations? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please hit that like button if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of survival and strength, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they are not alone in making difficult choices to protect themselves. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you always have the power to choose yourself, even when it is the hardest choice you have ever had to make.